My name is Fred Garcia, and I'm the moderator this evening, and I am a proud member of the League of Women Voters. Yes, the League allows men in. The co-sponsors for this evening's event include the Larimer County League of Women Voters and the Colorado Foundation for Universal Health Care. Tonight's major policy issue is Big Pharma. Big Pharma is pouring money into their lobbying campaign to thwart any serious efforts to rein in prescription drug prices. I learned that in 2017 that the prescription drug companies spent $175.5 million lobbying the federal government. That's a lot of money, but what makes it even more of a concern is that this is more money than the insurance industry spends in lobbying, or the oil and gas industry, or just about any other industry. It's big business.
What I'd like to kind of bring to the table is the perspective that I have shifting from primary care outpatient management to emergency room and hospital care, which is what I've been doing for the last 3 years. I think that Dr. Carroll will address kind of the issues related to private practice and such. But as now an emergency room physician in an isolated area predominantly served by what we call a hospital district, which is a taxpayer-funded facility, we have a little bit of more latitude, which private practice did not allow. But at the same time, those things that I see on a regular basis working in an emergency room continue to drive home over and over and over again how much the cost, and many of the things that were mentioned in this film have really addressed particularly the people that are in vulnerable populations, such as in rural areas, and particularly poor rural areas. Very commonly, as mentioned, I see people in the emergency room who have come in because they did not fill their prescription, they are not taking their medication, they are taking less of their medication. Very common occurrence. We're also seeing a large increase in the derivatives of pharmaceutical products which are not traditional. Many times, and this is kind of funny, I have farmers who come in and they want 10 pills so that they know what they look like, so when they go to the veterinary catalog, they can order the right drugs. Yeah, I mean, and in fact, they're probably adequately medicating themselves through the veterinary venue, which ironically is less expensive for exactly the same drugs. The third place that happens is I see a lot of, because we are in a agricultural area, we see a lot of people bringing in drugs from other countries. We see it commonly, but they are not necessarily equivalent, they are not necessarily translatable. And oftentimes generate quite a bit of complication for us. The other thing from the hospital side is that we're starting to see a lack of availability, shortages. I mean, in this country, how do we see shortages of drugs? Sometimes they are the common things: potassium chloride, lidocaine, normal saline, which resulted from Hurricane Maria, because most of those products were made in Puerto Rico. And then lastly, and this is something that I think is sometimes overlooked, is a cultural problem. I'm in an area of fiercely independent people. They do not want the government to do anything for them. A gentleman who came in with a large mass in his neck. I said, "You need to see an oncologist." He says, "I've seen an oncologist. I can't afford the treatment that he wants to give me." And I said, "Well, you are out." This was fortunately during an open enrollment for the Affordable Care Act. "Well, you can sign up." He said, "I'm not taking anything from the government," obviously in a much more colorful and expletive-filled way. But he did not. He was going to die. He couldn't pay for the drugs. He was not going to take the government's assistance. So I think that, and there's so many ramifications. I don't think there is a simple solution. I wish that there were. I think that our legislators need to act. I think that is probably the top-down only way that this is going to occur.
First of all, we don't have a healthcare system because health doesn't cost money. We have a disease management system, and the sicker you are, the more money the system makes. Think of a hospital and a pharmaceutical company if people didn't have diabetes or hypertension or heart disease. Now, some people would say, well, that's completely unimaginable. And I would argue there are some astounding evidence and data that shows that we could do better as a country for health, But that's really not the purpose for the talk tonight, but I really wanted to emphasize the difference that we don't have a healthcare system. We have a disease management system, and also we have a capitalistic system. And that, I think, is one of the biggest things that I've seen when I look at other places in the world. Most of the other first world countries do not have, or they have universal health care for everybody. It's a not-for-profit system, it's a for-profit system. So in some ways, America is unique, and in many cases it's kind of nice, but in many cases it's kind of expected. I also point out that the incredible profits that are coming from these systems aren't going to one or two people, they're going to shareholders. And there's a whole lot of Americans that are benefiting from this process. There's some that are not, but we have a living system here in America that depends on Wall Street capitalism as it is. I'll point also that a free market requires competition and transparency, and if you don't want to basically have a free market, which is exactly what the pharmaceutical industry doesn't want, you do what they do, which is you buy up all the competition and you hide behind doors. I'll also say, as a physician practicing in primary care, it's clear that most of the guidelines that we have for treating, the standard chronic diseases are based on medications that are still inexpensive and available. I have not had a pharm drug rep in my office for 20 years, maybe. I've not had a single lunch brought in. I've not had I think there's some pins that I have from someplace. But a big problem, I think, in medicine is the lobbying interest, the marketing interest. I don't have free samples because I never give those drugs out unless all the other drugs that are indicated and given as guidelines fail, which is rarely the case. And I really appreciate the discussion in the movie about the lack of comparative studies that show the newest $200 a month blood pressure medicine compared to a Tenol, which is I can still get for about $2 for a month. So I think the concept is this should not be a surprise to anybody. The fix is not simple, but I think it's pretty basic. If we don't get the profit out of the healthcare system, we're doomed. And as long as we have our congressional folks that are finishing their tour and the capital then going to work for the industries, we're in trouble. And I also just lastly stop with this. I think generally speaking, there are a lot of great people in the pharmaceutical industry and the research industry and all these things. But you can make an awful lot of money if you know how to game the system. And those folks are winning. And until we address that, until America can see that capitalistic system is creating the dilemma, we're in trouble. And I think it's going to happen, but it's probably going to happen in a catastrophic way than an intelligent solution like a group that evaluates these things.
I'm State Representative Joann Ginal, and I have been in the state legislature representing the eastern half of Fort Collins for the last 6 years. We just finished our session not even a week ago. And I am a scientist. I'm a bioscientist. I came to the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. I'm a reproductive endocrinologist. That's what brought me out here from the East Coast. But what you might not know about me is I spent most of my life, aside from several years of teaching at a college level, as well as and in a hospital laboratory as a clinical microbiologist, I was in the pharmaceutical industry. I have gone through every process or every type of job, from sales to sales training to marketing. And until I received my doctorate degree, I then went into clinical trials and new product development with many of the companies you saw up there, which I don't like, I mean, they are good companies. These companies have done good things for people. But I was not in this to do, or nor did I know the profits that were happening like this until I got into the state legislature. I knew there was increase in profits, but not to this extent. And every once in a while in my 20 plus years that I spent with Pharma, I would hear someone say, oh, I can't afford this drug, but it wasn't very often. And they were affordable. Now, I came in 1978, if that tells you something. That was when the pharmaceutical industry was hiring women for the first time, a mass hiring, because prior to that, they had all men, mostly pharmacists, and they had to change things up a little bit because their sales needed to be increased. 78, I'm going to tell you, I was in my low 20s, and I had no problem getting a job in sales. Merck was my first job, and the reason why I took Merck, among other pharmaceutical jobs, was because I could stay in my home city at that time of West Palm Beach, Florida. And so I didn't know that Merck was the Cadillac of all the pharmaceutical companies. And so this is something that, I mean, I was in for the right reasons. I was in to learn about the drugs, to help people, to talk to doctors about what we could do to help them, help their patients. And even at my last, before I retired, and I retired a couple of times from the pharmaceutical industry, as a medical science liaison, where I was overseeing clinical trials, new product development, I have to say that, I thought we were doing good things, and I didn't realize the prices that I've seen up here in the last couple of minutes. I have seen this before. This movie does make me quite angry, because that's not why I was in this. I was in this to make life better for people, and I still believe to this day that medicines should be affordable for everyone. And I've been involved in 3 bills on drug transparency, prescription drug transparency, now for the last 3 years. The first time it tanked, even in my own Democratic committee. And it was watching a drug go from new product, new drug entity, all the way to its final FDA approval. And what were the costs involved in that? Research and development, advertising, which, by the way, I wanted to add, and I'm probably going on too long, but there's so much to say. The TV advertising that was mentioned here, up until the late 90s, there was a gentlewoman's agreement with Pharma and doctors, and that there would be no commercials. There would be no television commercials or advertisements in various magazines like Time or any of the others. Now there is. What happened in that time frame, I'm not sure. But that was one thing I wanted to say. And the other 2 bills I brought forward, so I brought a transparency bill forward in 2016. It died in my Democratic committee, Health Committee. In 2017, and it focused mainly on high-cost drugs. That died, got out of the House, died in the Senate Health Committee. And this year, I brought a bill that actually looks at increases in drug prices by the pharmaceutical companies. They had to report over 2 years time frame if there was over a 10% increase in drug prices, and why. And that was shared with the insurance companies and also with everybody who had any type of medication from any of those, covered by any of those insurance companies, which would explain why their prices were going up. That died this year as well in the Senate Health Committee. Went through the House, again, died in the Senate Health Committee. I will keep trying as long as I am in office, and I will probably keep trying even after that. So I just wanted to share that part, and I'm open for questions.
This question is for Representative Ginal. Could you let us know what were the reasons that were given when the failed in committee? What were the reasons you got for why they did not want to vote for that bill?
Thank you for that question. There were no reasons. You simply voted yay or nay if you were in the Senate, or you electronically voted in the House. And if I'm not mistaken, every time it was party line on third reading in the House, and party line in the Senate committee where it usually met its demise. They did push back, pharmaceutical companies pushed back saying that it would damage innovation and research, which that's not evident to me. The other thing is that it would create a stockpiling of prescription drugs, which would create shortages. And that is a myth, because we don't. There are laws that prevent stockpiling. And I believe it's twice a year there is a price increase, and they have to say when this price increase is coming. And so those were the two biggest pushbacks. But it was very interesting because we had every single citizen, as well as from small business to insurance companies to even other healthcare chronic care collaboratives, people who deal with people with specific disease states, that were up there in support of this, and even the unions. And the only people that testified out of in opposition were the pharmaceutical companies, as well as the biopharma companies.
Hi, Glenn Pearson. I just want to make one comment and then one question, because I think very well-meaning people get confused. The theme of the movie is to show that free market fails in healthcare and fails with prescription drug pricing. So transparency actually wouldn't do anything. It's been on the national news many times, these $1,000 a pill, these $100,000 per treatment drugs. It's, the majority of Americans know that prescription drug prices are out of control, but since it's not a true free market like buying a car or refrigerator, since they have a monopoly and they all work together and they pay Congress essentially to not change to what other countries do, the market fails. So that's the theme of this movie. Maybe watch it again. So then trying to pass a bill for transparency doesn't really do anything, because that's actually trying to help consumers become more intelligent to help a free market. The question I have is, so what the film shows and what every single other country has done is they have a national formulary where Medicare bargains for 325 million Americans. Our prescription drug prices would go down, and we'd actually know more of which drugs are effective and which are not. So, and of course, then you could just make the whole system and have Medicare for all, a single insurance entity that covers all 325 million Americans, and that would get rid of that free market failure in the rest of the healthcare industry. So I would just wonder if the three of you, are you in favor of Medicare bargaining for all 325 million of us, either for prescription drugs or have a Medicare for all system?
Yes, I would favor Medicare for all. I don't quite know the logistics of how that would be accomplished, because in my mind, it would have to be incremental. I think that massive overhaul would be resisted so massively that the whole effort would fail. And I part of what Senator Aguilar's push was it last year? I think that was part of the issue that I had with that particular movement, was that, the notion of upheaval, I think, met as much resistance as anything else. I worked for some of the formulary pharmacy benefits, the initial Pacific era back in the early 90s. And we were involved with coming up with formularies for our clients. And we did base them primarily on availability, cost, and efficiency. And I think that probably is what happened with part of that mythology was what happened with the Medicare D negotiation, because they assumed that you were going to see the same type of negotiation from the private insurers, which obviously was delusional, And they were expecting that same thing to happen, and it didn't. I think what you're seeing now is a result of that. But yes, I think Medicare for All is ultimately the proper way to go, but I think that it's going to need to be incremental.
Yes. And I disagree. You know, we can put a man on the moon. We can do any damn thing we want to. You know, the argument of it's impossible is so ludicrous. But the dynamic is there'll be winners and losers. As was introduced, I'm on the board of the Colorado Medical Society, and the CEO of the Denver Chamber came to visit us on our invite, and she said, our members have had it. They can't continue to pay this. So, you know, I hate to say it, but in my practice, I also have patients that won't stop drinking or smoking until they have their heart attack or die. So it takes a catastrophic event sometimes to make a catastrophic change. And this would be a huge catastrophic change. It would benefit business, it would benefit consumers, it would benefit society, but it would hurt the living bejesus out of the pharmaceutical industry and the hospital and the physicians. I mean, it wouldn't put us out of business. We would all do reasonably well. But as Dr. Ting was talking about, there are people in this country that hate the government. And I think we can look back at Reagan, who said government's not the solution, government's the problem, and they still believe it. And I look at it as like government's not the solution, but they're a hell of a lot better than the private industry, which is definitely the problem. Because they're good at what I said, they're good at making money. And all these people, Shkreli and all these folks, I mean, they're gods in the finance world. Look what they did. Look how much money they made. That's an impressive feat. Okay, people died, but America looks to the capitalistic, we've got to win. And Glenn, you're absolutely right, but this is not a free market system. This is capitalism, it's not free market. There is a difference.
I do believe in Medicare for all. I always have. I think with the current administration, I don't think that's going to happen. Can we do it state by state? That was the big price tag that really, I think, kind of stymied what the vote was. I want it. I don't think anybody in this room would not like to have medical care available to them like other countries have. But Glenn, in your statement about transparency won't do anything, I disagree with you because the bill that I brought forth this session, was, as I said, looking at a 10% increase in drug costs over a 2-year period of time. And if it is increased, even 9.7 one year, 9.7 the next year, it's still over 10%. Why? Why did you have to do that? And so I think that being made available to consumers, and I think the consumers are the bottom line of who's the most important because they're the ones who are missing out on their medication, as Dr. Ting had said, they're cutting medication, they're even not taking medication, they're going to a veterinarian to get medication because it's cheaper. And that's just, there's something wrong with this. People should be able to afford a medication. It should be available for everyone. And so, transparency to me is alerting someone ahead of time, at least 90 days ahead of time, by insurance companies, if the cost of the drug that they're taking is going up in price and why. And so they won't get shell-shocked when they go to the pharmacy. The other thing I wanted to bring up is orphan drugs. And you saw that on a couple of commercials there. Enbrel started out as an orphan drug, more or less. There are a lot of orphan drugs out there right now. And when I was, back in the early days of when I was in pharma, we had medications that looked at the big picture. We had heart medications that looked at people who had renal problems. We had heart medications that looked at people who needed control of their electrical system in their heart, just to be kind of general. We looked at big populations of people. And then it all changed to me, and I didn't understand why until I got into office. We're going to go with our orphan drugs. All we need is a small amount of people. We can get this drug through very quickly because the FDA has a bypass mechanism, and we can build on that. Cancer, looking specifically at a certain cancer, building upon it, getting that, the approval, and then having exclusive rights for that drug for about 7 years. And then doing other studies, and look, we found it for this cancer. So we're expanding it out little by little with increasing the fact that they can keep their patent life and they can keep their drug prices high. That's where you're seeing things going from several $100s to thousands of dollars. There's no patent protection, and they can start using it for new discoveries, and that extends their patent life. So orphan drugs were coming out in the mid-90s, and I just questioned it, and I didn't understand it. It didn't make any sense to me, but now it makes all the sense in the world to me. For cancer drugs, for rheumatoid arthritis, to psoriasis, and tell me how those two are together. But anyways, that's how they got that indication. We have Coumadin-like products that are out on the market right now. Rivaroxaban, apixaban, they're taking the place of Coumadin, and for good reason. So you don't have to go get your blood tested. You can you can watch your salads or whatever you're eating, so you don't get. You guys know more about this. I forgot all about that. But the vitamin K. But with this, there's no monopolies. There's about 4 or 5 companies, and there are competitive pricing. And the more companies that are on the market, hopefully, I see a head shaking out there. Hopefully, those prices will go down. But generics are going up in price too. So you've got orphan drugs, you've got the large type of drugs that look at big picture, and now you have generics. And another thing I want to tell you that just passed, and I wanted to ask these doctors this question. Do you ever remember when we went from brand names to generics? Did we ever need a piece of legislation in a state that goes through most states that said that we could do it? Or could you just check the box if you wanted a generic? I ask you this because we're doing this state by state with biologics and biosimilars. And it is now for exclusivity and for rights, patent rights, on these particular companies that are not only making the biologics, but making the biosimilars. So I never saw any type of legislation.
Used to be DAW.
Dispense is written, right?
Had to be brand name, not generic.
But only if the doctors wanted that.
When the DAW transition occurred, that never used to be. And that was a regulation that was then passed, that pharmacists actually had the capability to take a brand drug and turn it into a generic drug without the physician's instructions, unless the DAW box was written.
I'm a retired pharmacist.
Most of us, yeah. So do you remember when that happened, when the DAW came into place?
Probably in the
80s, I think.
I'm wondering whether there's any kind of short-term solution in the importation, or rather the re-importation of drugs from Canada in particular. And is that a matter of state legislation at all, or is it federally controlled? And is Pharma an absolute barrier to the change in legislation that would be required there?
I'll start, and I can tell you that we have brought a bill forward this year for being able to buy our drugs at a lesser cost from Canada, and that was killed in the Senate.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no law that says we can't get drugs from other countries. Is that correct? Yeah. Because we get cars from other countries, and we get food from other countries, and we get a lot of stuff from other countries. Matter of fact, most other countries manufacture the drugs that we get here and get them. So from what I remember, again, the pharmaceutical industry was losing money when people were finding this alternative process, and Homeland Security would every now and again grab some drugs and say this is bad, but there was no data ever that showed that these drugs were dangerous. People would die, absolutely, but they also died just as frequently taking the drugs from the pharmacy down the street. So to my knowledge, my own son, I gave him Accutane, which is a medication for terrible acne when the dermatologist thought he needed it. With my insurance, it was $700 a month for 5 months. I could get the drug from Barbados for $250. I love my son. His acne looks great. It was fine. Now, I didn't believe for a second that this was a terrible drug. I didn't go on the black market. I had a physician's prescription. So I do think you need to have a prescription that needs to be filled by a pharmacist who's regulated, but there's no reason we can't do this. So I do think pharmaceutical industry recognizes it's a loss to them, and they're going to get in the way of that. But one of the things I would point out is that I do think it's important to recognize, does your doctor have a lot of free samples? Are they giving you medications that are indicated based on guidelines, or are they just giving you the medicine that's in the cabinet? Most of my patients want to have the most efficacious drug, and there are probably very few examples where you have to have the brand name, but most of the time the generics suffice. For and the pharmacists correct me on this, the generics only have to be, I think, within, for the brand, for the active ingredient of the drug, that is the only component of the drug they have to match with like about a 90% efficiency. All the other things that are in the drugs that potentially could help with the efficacy of the drug, that doesn't matter. So the generics may not work quite as well. But again, if we had studies that showed the generics versus the new drugs, we'd be in much better shape. But good luck getting that with the pharmaceutical industry and the current legislative process.
And then we have a proposal from the president that says that the other countries are paying too much, or not paying enough for drugs, and they should have to pay more. So I don't know where that argument is going to go, and I certainly don't know where it came from.
Yeah, and I on the film, I'm not sure, but it showed the Indian for the hepatitis C, $10, and they were still making a profit. Did you catch that? So the argument is they're making a profit, but it's not 200,000% profit. It's a 20% profit, and you see that reflected in their in the general profits. They exceed every other Fortune 500 company, which is, you should just say, wait a minute, how the hell they do that? Well, they don't do it by fair play. They do it by ripping you off. So we just need to wise up and say this can no longer happen.
I understand that the Veterans Administration is able to negotiate for their drugs. Why then not Medicare?
It was a specific line item in the Part D negotiation and legislation. And as mentioned here in the film, that was lobbied heavily by the pharmaceutical industry. Until that is reversed, and hopefully it can be with some will, Medicare D specifically prohibits negotiation.
And do you have any idea what time of the day that law passed in Washington? It was 5 a.m. That bill failed on numerous occasions. It should never have gone through, but there were a lot of political ramifications. But once again, and not Scully, but you saw a couple of the players, but almost every single person involved in that legislation went to work for the pharmaceutical industry, making millions and millions of dollars. So it was a fly-by-night passed, and it was done with party line vote mainly. A few Democrats, but mostly the Republicans pushed it through. It was an upcoming presidential election. George Bush wanted to have some wins that he could win the senior vote. So once again, the historical record isn't, well, this is a great thing, but when you look back on it, there was a reason for that vote to come through. And the actuarial data that showed what it was going to cost, we knew before the bill was even to be considered. It was underestimated, but the people that were going to present that were told to be quiet or they would be fired. So it's a terrible, terrible history, one of the most improper bills that ever made it through, but it was all done for the greed of the pharmaceutical industry and for political gain. And that's the truth.
I just want to say that, everybody's looking at health insurance companies and saying that they're the bad guys, or hospitals. When both health insurance companies are regulated to some extent, they have to pay back anything over 66% or 6%. Hospitals are regulated. The only industry that isn't regulated, and it is, and Pharma can tell you it is heavily regulated. Well, it is from the time a new product gets developed until it gets approved by the FDA. It's heavily regulated. But it's the time after it gets approved by the FDA that sky's the limit, guys. What is the wholesale acquisition cost of the price of that drug, and why are you putting that price on that drug? How do you justify this? There is no law. There is nothing to stop a pharmaceutical company with a new drug to put any price they want on that drug. That's where we need some sort of transparency without harming their research and development, but making this more available to people. New drugs, what good are they if they're not going to help people get well or have a better quality of life, or if they can't take them at all because they can't afford them? So it's not targeting drug corporations. We're looking at, why aren't we looking at the price of the wholesale acquisition cost? And when I say that, that's the price that the pharmaceutical manufacturer agrees with pharmacies, with PBMs, with middlemen, and I hate to say just McKesson because that's the only thing that comes to mind right now, but forgive me, McKesson, I know there's a number of other companies like you, but that's where we need to be looking at. We need to look at, why are you putting that wholesale acquisition price, that price tag on the cost of your drug? Justify it, and maybe it'll make sense. But you saw Martin Shkreli there, and he had no justification whatsoever except, I don't even want to say what I want to say about that. But
you said that at least a lot of the portion of the community where you work, a number of people would rather die than accept, or at least some people, than accept government assistance in healthcare. Do you have a feel for what in your community people would find an acceptable system that would keep down prices and also not involve heavy government activity?
I think that much of that has to be that pervasive mythology that's developed that, the Reagan, government is the problem. The thing that I find, and I work at a hospital district which is funded by tax dollars. The community came together and said, we will tax ourselves to build this hospital. And because we have done that, we are now a public entity and are able to provide services at discounted prices and without regard to insurability or any of those other issues. I think it's that same notion of getting people to recognize that this is a collective problem that can be solved by community as much as by government. And I think that they would see, I could see our community agreeing to, again, tax themselves to provide pharmaceutical basic coverage for the members of the community. So I think the element is more ground up as opposed to top down.
In Germany, their universal health care is a privately run nonprofit system. So one potential solution isn't to say government's going to run it, but let's get the profit out of it and look at that. So T.R. Reid has a great book that looks at all these different potential solutions. But the roads are social, the sewer system is, the electrical grid is. We live in a socialistic world, whether you like it or not, and it's kind of nice. But there's going to be a group that's going to hate it, and I keep reminding people that when you flush your toilet, that's not a private company that helps to make that happen. It's the government. And if it was a private company, there'd be toilets backing up.
The movie made the comment that when big business and consumers come together, that's when we're going to start to see change. Can the panelists react to that? Is that something that's actually going to happen?
Well, I think it is happening. I mentioned the CEO of the Denver Chamber coming to the medical society. So I do think it's going to be a catastrophic process. What I said to the and I forget her last name. I think it was Karen, but she's just a really brilliant person. But she, I don't know what the $1 billion market is for the Denver Chamber. But she said, we're going to get the hospitals together, we're going to get the pharmaceuticals together, we're going to get the doctors together, we're going to get all these people together. You're going to get in a room and you're going to hammer this out. And once again, here I am, a lowly family doc on the medical society board saying, there's one entity that you forgot, and that's the patients. Because if we have a healthier population, some of this really gets better. And I think that the it's already here. I mean, we're spending so much. Businesses are hurting. I'm not sure how much longer it's going to last, but I definitely think that that's going to be the driver, or it's going to completely fail.
I tend to agree, and actually, I've mentioned this to my family many times. I said, the system is on the verge of implosion. There's no way that doesn't happen. I think that if that implosion is accelerated in a manner that actually creates large numbers of unemployment, large loss of accessibility, and that kind of catastrophe, I'm just not sure that, to my mind, the potential ramification of that is something that we should welcome. Hence my thinking more along the lines of something incremental, whether it's by dropping the age gradually, whether it's by continuing certain elements that can then be broadly applied and then expanded. I'm not a big fan of apocalypse.
I'm just looking over the supporters that came to the table, along with consumers, on this last bill and the bill before in 2017. So on this bill, House Bill 1260 was the House Bill number. The supporters were anywhere from the Colorado Association of Local Public Health Officials to the Colorado Academy of Family Physicians, Colorado Association of Health Plans, Colorado Center for Law and Policy, the Children's Campaign, the Colorado Community Safety Net Programs, Mental Health and Mental Wellness Network, the Organization for Latina Opportunities, Pharmacist Society, the Senior Lobby of Colorado, Eagle County Board of Commissioners, Healthier Colorado, Kaiser Permanente, National Association of Social Workers, and National Hemophilia Foundation, One Colorado, Patients for Affordable Drugs, Planned Parenthood, the Bell Policy Center, UFCW Local 7, United, also Unite Local 23, and a number of the Denver Metro Chamber as well. And so if this doesn't tell you, there's not one pharmaceutical company here that works with us. And when I had stakeholder meetings, and I had a number of them, last year I remember I had everybody in a room, insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies would not say a word. They listened to everything, and then they come back to me individually, and they'd say, we don't like this. Can we change this? We might come to a support, right, if you change this. So, we had some discussions. A few things were changed for their favor, thinking that they would join on, but they never joined on. And in fact, when you get the insurance companies together with the pharmaceutical companies in one room, I have never seen groups of lobbyists where they didn't say a word. You could have heard a pen drop. And it was just amazing because those people always have something to say. And so you can see where the force is. And we just have to keep chipping away at this, or somehow, I mean, they're the 8,000-pound gorilla in the room. The pharmaceutical companies are. I was proud of what I did in Pharma. I was there to help people. And I'm sure that most of the other people I worked with were in there for the same reason. And when I see what's going on, and how it affects doctors, patients, and, it's just, it's not fair. It's not right. And would I want a Medicare for all in drugs? Absolutely. We need to do something. I've tried 3 different ways in 3 different years, and they've all died. But I will come back with something else and see if it works.
Dr. Carroll and Representative Joann, would you help me understand what should we as citizens do at the state level, and what should we do to change at the national level? Can you give me a brief description of just how we should act?
What messages should we send to our Colorado delegation and our Washington delegation?
For our Colorado delegation, I know that all of the people that are, I know that there are people on both sides of the aisle that really believe in this. And because it happens to all of us, whether you're Republican or Democrat, and I don't really think we should get political here, but there are people who want to vote for this, and they can't because they're scared that their seat will not be around. They will get voted out. And seriously, they won't get the money that they need or the support that they need. I think that goes both on the state level and on the federal level. And no, I do not get money from Pharma. Funny thing, I do not, and I would not. But I find that you showing up to or writing letters to your congressman, and it does make a difference. They have to count them. I count them at the state level. Everybody who comes in opposed to a bill, like the Drug Transparency Act, or in support gets counted. All your emails, all your letters, all your phone calls, support, oppose. I listen to the people I represent, and believe me, majority of the people want to have the cost of prescription drugs reduced.
Present company accepted. I don't think there's much you could do at the state level on this big issue. We talked about the Veterans Administration and Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid is split 50-50. I guess my suggestion would be campaign finance reform. If somehow you can create a system where there isn't such an economic burden on the politicians to get elected, and then there has to be some sort of a statement that says, you can't just leave Washington and go work for this country with a 100-fold increase in your salary as long as you played their game. So I think campaign reform would be a huge step if there was one thing I would strongly suggest. I agree with the current administration that it's going to be hard to buck the system. But there have been, I'm sure in Washington, bills floated to try to limit the reciprocation that occurs when people are leaving their offices. And I know Representative Ginal would love this, let's pay our legislators a bucket load of money, and then they don't want to go work for these places, and they don't have to work 3 jobs like the teachers, et cetera. But that's the best I can come up with.
I want to ask for a hand of appreciation for our panelists. They were excellent.